Greetings, ladies and managers. Welcome to this latest narration of the web series Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. What do you get when you put a fox, an owl, a humanoid bird, and an anthropomorphic wolf all under the same non-Euclidean roof alongside a power-armored human? If there was anyone out there who was capable of answering this, then I applaud their creativity. Because personally, I was at a loss for words. There I was yet again, sandwiched between layers of synthetic weave and metal composites, staring down an owl whose eyes betrayed a look of sullen annoyance that bordered on outright disdain. All the while, the incessant, unmitigable pings of push notification after push notification kept reminding me that this was in fact my current reality, and not some fever dream stemming from a night of heavy binge reading. The owl had entered with the theatrics befitting of an endgame boss, had now positioned itself just a few feet away from me. So close that I now felt that one of the worst bouts of total whiplash slapped me across the face, as all of the sinister flair it had incurred with its dramatic entrance had all but been cast aside by the way of its short, pudgy stature. What would have been an arrival of a beast rivaling the scale of ferocity of a dragon was instead replaced by a small, plump owl. Not a dragon owl, mind you, nor some sort of owl-like beast, just a regular, almost insultingly normal-sized owl. One that barely reached my shins, if I were to be generous and count its hat as part of its total height. It was as if a dungeon master had pulled out all the stops in the build-up to an endgame boss, only to whip out a dollar store model of the boss in question, completely undermining what should have been the highlight of the entire experience. Our stare down felt like it had gone on for an entire minute, before finally it grew tired of me and walked straight past me altogether, focusing on the fox as the poor thing bowed its little head in response, its snout all but resting on the cold marble floor of the library, whimpering out a small little cries as it stared up meekly at the owl. "So, buddy now, is it?" the owl finally spoke, its voice very, very much what I expected from a creature of its size. It was a deep, but only as deep as an owl's hoot could really go, with the rest of the intonation eerily smooth and composed, whereas the fox had an animated quality to him, each and every word punctuated with yips and yaps, and an undercurrent of excitable foxness. The owl instead carried itself more akin to a person. Dare I say it, it carried itself more in a manner more distinguished than a majority of the student body I'd met to date, Uluna included. "Yes, librarian," the fox yipped out meekly. Just before the scene took an unexpected turn, without warning and without any hesitation, the owl stepped forward and pressed its claw firmly against the fox's head. Its blunted talons tightened, clenching the fox's scalp in an iron grip, cinching up its warm fur along the process. "Yours is a story of consistent inconsistency, for a great achievement has been sullied by an unsatisfactory transaction. A transaction which favors the knowledge seeker, but not the knowledge holder. An unfairness has occurred, and the library is nothing if not fair. So please, buddy, utilize your newfound position to strike a balance where an imbalance has been occurred." The owl spoke in a manner that sounded more like an instruction and then condensation. Almost as quickly as it had begun its assault on the fox, so too did it stop, as it relented and merely positioned itself atop the fox's head, using it as a perch as Buddy now approached me, staring warily at my opaque lenses. "Kadadema Booker, as your personal library assistant, it is my responsibility to both represent your interests and that of the libraries. I apologize if I have not made this relationship clear at first, and I apologize if I've underperformed in my capacity as a facilitator of knowledge. It is clear that at this point I have disproportionately favored my responsibilities to you as our patron, and disregarded my responsibilities to the library as its assistant. I have underdelivered the knowledge bestowed upon you from this library, and for that I must apologize. And there now exists a deficit that must be corrected. In short, the library requires that a toll be paid for the services which I have rendered." Buddy spoke in a manner that clearly indicated that he didn't want to do this, but rather had to do this as part of whatever responsibilities he was bound to. A part of me would have been massively impressed by the fox's accent into business formal eloquence, especially considering how most of our interactions up till this point had been decidedly less than business casual. That part of me, however, was kept more or less in check by a more pressing concern. "A toll," I parroted back. "I did say that I'm not in the market for info brokerage, and you explicitly stated that my presence here was sufficient enough payment for granting us access to the information that we were after," I stated plainly. The owl let out a series of purposely placed hoots at my rebuttal, each and every one carrying with it an overture of disappointment that caused the fox it was perched on to whine out in apologetics. "You have neglected to inform our new patron of the rules and standards of the library," the owl spoke, the conversation once again directed not towards me but the fox. I've only hinted at it briefly, librarian, although I was intending on informing her of it at once." The owl all but shot down the fox's attempt at an excuse with a simple remark. "There is a time and a place for apologies, but this isn't one of them, buddy." There was a terseness to its voice, yes, but there was something else to it that I found surprising given that I expected from the place like this. There was a sense of genuine honesty there. This wasn't another one of the Nexus' thinly veiled attempts at a petty jab, nor was it in some attempt at instruction coated with contempt and interpersonal rivalry. No, this was one of the few instances of a conversation that didn't carry with it any duplicitous undertones. "I shall take the reins of this primary conduit, and you shall remain in my shadow. Watch carefully, and let this be a learning experience." The owl spoke calmly, before shifting its orange face towards me. I took charge, setting the stage for the conversation on my own terms. Whilst I would go into a whole rant regarding my personal reservations of info brokerage, I'm going to assume that you have some sort of convoluted reasoning as to how this whole arrangement doesn't actually constitute info brokering. I immediately started off the conversation, making my stance known without going too far into outright false assumptions. It would be so easy to simply construct my own narrative on this place, to create a set of fixed false beliefs right out of the gate. But it wouldn't be the right nor the smart thing to do. I had my personal gripes, but I was willing to hear out the other side before I came to my own conclusions. The library appreciates that its newest patron is one that presents with a level head and an open mind, albeit your choice of words can be construed as confrontational. I cannot fault you for your current dispositions, given the transactional faux pas incurred by your personal assistant, and by extension, myself. For this, I take personal accountability. The owl nodded once, or rather rolled its head back and forth in a way that only an owl could do. I know this might sound crazy, especially given the track record of those in charge in the Nexus thus far, but I felt like the owl actually meant everything it said. In fact, it seemed outright apologetic. Sure, it was wordy, but it was an admission of guilt and a genuine attempt to take responsibility. Something I haven't actually yet seen in this place thus far. Is this an actual, reasonable, level-headed person in a position of power? Guess the SIOP manual section of conventional diplomacy is going to be of use after all. My people sent me here with the intent of establishing constructive and open dialogue, open-mindedness and willingness to compromise within reason, with a goal of reaching mutual understandings, are just some of the defining characteristics of myself and the civilization I hail from. Whilst this doesn't mean that I'll take everything at face value, it does mean that I am willing and able to sit down for a civil conversation, as long as there exists a reciprocation of mutual respect. I offered, setting down the ground rules of our conversation. This clearly intrigued the owl as it straightened itself atop the fox's head. Open-mindedness and willingness to compromise, constructive and open dialogue, mutual understanding. The owl parroted back, taking time to ponder on each and every one of the buzzwords I'd brought over from the Diplomacy 101 class. Tell me, Cadet Emma Booker, are those words your own choosing, or are they words of a wiser elder speaking through you? I paused at that, taking the scant few seconds of silence to choose between going down the diplomatic retrace that was the SIOP conversational algorithm, or adding my own spin to the mix. I'm afraid if I answer that question, it'll be you who'll have incurred a deficit of knowledge on your part. I refuse to enter another transaction before the full extent of the rules of the library are revealed to me first. I decided on the latter, really embracing the personal initiatives aspect of my mission parameters. The director did say a lot of things mission would fall into adapting and improvising to my surroundings after all. The owl didn't flinch, didn't so much as blink, as I could feel a response formulating behind those intelligent eyes. The thing clearly wasn't capable of smiling, not with its beak, but the tone of its voice it used was more than enough for me to know that it was enjoying my response. It has been far too long since I've interacted with a being of willingness for measured conversation such as yourself, Cadet Emma Booker. It hooted back at an undercurrent of restrained amusement. I respect your terms, Cadet Emma Booker, so long as you're able to support the integrity of your words with your actions. I allowed those words to sink in for a few moments. You will find that the rules of this realm, unlike that of the Nexus, are simple and straightforward. For we are established and constructed to perform one simple and unwavering task: to collect, organize, and preserve all forms of knowledge in perpetuum. Every aspect of our existence serves to facilitate these aims, and every rule was written with this in mind. Here you will not find the petty squabbles of the world beyond our walls, but instead an unflinching commitment and devotion to the library and everything it stands for. There was a pause, as the beady little eyes of hundreds, if not thousands of foxes once more poked in from the dark corners of the ever-shifting room. For the library is eternal, but the mortal world is not. Knowledge without preservation is meaningless. And we are the keepers of meaning. 1,000 voices spoke all at once, only to disappear as soon as they'd appeared. Many may misconstrue our words as an explicit slight against the world beyond our walls. This couldn't be further from the truth. We wish no ill will on the worlds and realms beyond our own, for we do not care for them aside from the knowledge they may provide. This serves as a context for our first rule, one that may not concern your activities within the library, but which defines the existence of the library itself. Rule number 1. The library exists to serve no one but itself, but does not expressly bar anyone from entering its walls. The owl hooted deeply, taking a moment to gauge my reaction, despite very much being aware that the helmet obscured anything happening beneath it. Rule number 2. The library exists as a keeper of knowledge, but does not prohibit the access of said knowledge from those who seek it. Rule number 3. The library exists as a collector of knowledge, and encourages exchanges of any and all pieces of knowledge, no matter how trivial or significant. Rule number 4. The library does not exist to expedite the search of knowledge for those who seek it, with the sole exception of those who are willing to trade knowledge for the service. Heh. So much for all the talk about being the great provider of knowledge and all, Bellman's gruff and grisly voice quickly interjected, breaking the self-imposed silence held throughout much of this mission. This is a misunderstanding on the part of the misinformed Nexian and adjacent realm masses. We exist not to provide knowledge, but merely as a repository that may be accessed. That is all. The owl quickly corrected the Lupinor before turning back to me. Rule number 5. To those that the library deems worthy, a title of patronage shall be bestowed. Amongst the privileges of patronage is the assignment of a personal assistant, and a written title of honor that shall act as a calling card for your personal assistant and myself, should the patron request an expedited transaction. With the rules having been laid out, and with the owl remaining eerily silent at the end of it all, I decided to get to business. At which point did the deficit start? I asked plainly. At the point wherein the second line of questioning began, Cadet Emma Booker. Your first transaction was satisfactory. You entered the library requesting for a brief, succinct description of the ritual of duplicity and nulls. The compensation for the service of both information indexing and correlation have since been paid. Your second line of questioning, expanding beyond the parameters of your first, was the point at which the deficit started, the owl explained clearly. The first line of questioning being paid by my mere presence is payment enough, correct? I asked the owl, directly quoting the fox's statement from earlier before. This is, indeed, correct, the owl nodded once. Could I ask just how exactly my mere presence here was payment enough for the information that's so clearly valuable and sensitive? It was at this point that the owl's eyes widened and narrowed in quick succession, as if in disbelief at my words, before finally resigning itself to the answer. You underestimate and undervalue your presence here, Cadet Emma Booker, the owl hooted out sincerely. It is no exaggeration when I say that your very being alone has been enough to fill the contents of an entire book. Why, Buddy here now has an entire new thesis to write up based on the information he was able to gather with his inspection on your personal and your armor. I shot a questioning glance at the fox, who seemed to intuitively know my intent as he whimpered out a series of guilty whines. Why don't you explain what makes Cadet Emma Booker so exceptional, that her presence here is of immense value, Buddy? The owl turned to Buddy, who gulped nervously before speaking. From the superficial observations of the material alone, the colors, texture, temperature, and sensations of the exotic metals that constitute your armor plates, to the way the fabric underneath shifts, bends, and moves, every aspect of your person and the materials that adorn you is wholly and truly novel. It is unlike anything we have seen. It is unlike anything we've ever referenced within the annals of this library. It is exceedingly rare to meet a being possessed materials so novel, especially with the Nexus. The owl shushed the overexcitable fox before he could continue. That is just one small aspect of the value of your mere presence here, Cadet Emma Booker, the owl continued, before moving to lock its gaze on my vocoder, initiating a completely unrelated tangent. Your suit and your unique vocalizations brings me to my next point. You aren't speaking High Nexian, are you, Cadet Emma Booker? It uttered out, confidently, in what little way the tone of genuine inquiry, but rather a statement drenched in a paper-thin facade of inquiry. I don't see how any of this is relevant to the conversation. Consider this the payment for the knowledge deficit thus far. Now tell me, do you or do you not speak High Nexian? It asked back in a sing-song fashion, complete without dulcet hoot towards the end of the sentence. No, I do not, I answered succinctly, the answer to which was received with looks of genuine disbelief from the likes of Thassia and Thalman, both of whom seemed to be doing a complete double-take on the entire situation, with the pair moving closer to one another, perhaps with the intent of discussing just what my answer entailed. How did you know? I quickly retorted. It is the manner by which you choose your words, Cadet Emma Booker. There is a mathematical precision to the manner of your speech, as if there is some greater artifice powering a mechanism whose sole purpose is to carefully and precisely pick and prod at the sum total of the definitive collection of the High Nexian dictionary, processing it through a structural works of a definitive instruction on High Nexian grammar rules, and using some form of complex mathematical decision-making processes to determine what words will end up where, and how it is to be structured with the precision of a mathematical formula. The owl touted with an enormous sense of pride, which leads me to believe that your words are not your own, but instead a living, breathing, dynamic system of mathematics that converts whatever language it is you speak to the High Nexian. A truly innovative, truly novel solution. Elegant, graceful, and immensely intriguing. It was at this point the owl started to sound increasingly alike to the fox, its thirst for knowledge very much seeping into how it carried itself as it sat there, perched atop the fox's head. To say that the owl was correct in its assertions would be an understatement. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought anyone from this reality would have been able to so accurately sum up the complex machinations of an onboard translation suite and its associated software so succinctly without the knowledge of what software even was. Instead, the owl relied on what it knew, and what it knew was clearly enough to interpret the fact the entire charade of language I was putting on was indeed translated. The work of thousands of leading linguists and software developers dissected each and every line of the few scraps of knowledge the Nexus had sent us prior to my arrival. The 2 books that we received and dissected, corresponding to the 2 books the owl was so quick to reference. Am I correct in my deliberation, new one? The owl snapped me out of my reverie. Is my answer to your first question concerning your assertions payment enough for the information deficit? I shot back, which once again seemed to delight the owl as it shifted its little head to and fro. Yes, it is, Cadet Emma Booker. You are under no obligation to confirm nor deny my second line of questioning. I paused for a moment to collect my thoughts before it finally clicked. There was still another vital piece of intel that I was critically lacking at this point. Whilst the threat of the null had been expanded upon and narrowed down, it didn't seem to include just how it was this threat was to be dealt with. I didn't know if a bullet to the head was all it needed, or whether or not I needed to whip out a flamethrower to burn it to ash. This was the perfect instance of trade for said intel. Actually, I would like to answer that question, I offered. Oh, now for what piece of knowledge would you like to trade this for, Cadet Emma Booker? The owl spoke in a sing-song fashion. Nulls, or rather, how to kill one. I spoke in no uncertain terms. It was with that single line of question that yet another book was violently pulled out of the shelves, landing in front of Thasia, as the owl seemed to understand just how our group dynamics seemed to function. The dispatching of a null can take one of two distinct forms, one of brute physicality or one of magical acumen. For the former, the application of any sufficient physical force directed towards the core of the creature should be sufficient, though determining where the creature's core lies will be a challenge even for the most determined of magically deficient combatants. For the latter, the application of a Class 10 spell of disassembly or transfiguration will be necessary for the removal of the null's core, wherein sufficient force will later be applied to destroy it in its entirety. Thasia once more read verbatim, her speech hitching up a bit as she went over the class of the spell was required. The book closed unexpectedly, as the owl's eyes once more locked with my own, expecting me to upend my end of the bargain. To answer your question, yes, you are more or less right. I am using a system, one of incredibly complex mathematics, to translate all being spoken to me and all being spoken from me, I acknowledge, garnering a series of reproving hoots from the owl. Let us consider this transaction completed, Cadet Emma Booker. You're really willing to give us all this intel just for a yes-no answer? I shot back skeptically. The library has vested interest in transactions, which will aid in keeping its patrons alive for future transactions, Cadet Emma Booker. Which reminds me, I would like to bestow upon you your title. The owl spread its wings and flew straight up at that. Not so much flying, but instead shooting straight up like a rocket at impossible speeds. A scant few seconds passed before it returned, holding a small rectangular card in its beak. The card was the size of your average physical ID, just slightly thicker and made of solid gold. Reaching over to grab it from the owl's beak, I noticed the finer details that looked as if it had been laser-etched on. On it was my name, rank, and a large number of blank spaces clearly meant for the rest of my personal information. It didn't take long for me to realize just what it was. A glorified library card. Cadet Emma Booker, henceforth you shall be known as a patron of the library. This is a title that carries with it immense weight and honor within these walls. Whether or not this title carries over beyond the space is none of our concern. It does, however, mean that you hold rights and privileges beyond that of the average knowledge seeker. Should you require any additional assistance, or should you wish for any further transactions, the library shall expedite it to the best of our abilities. There was a pause as the fox eyed the owl warily for a few seconds, as if to remind it of something. I would be remiss if I did not inform you that it would be well within your rights to deny this honor or reject this honor now, or at any point in the time you wish. The owl nodded his little head. I do hope you accept, Emma. I'm so very excited to be seeing you around more visits. The fox mewed and yipped in excitement, jumping up and down a few times as it beamed out a happy little smile, punctuated by those excitable noises entirely unique to the Vulpine race. And for Benny rubs and hip pats. I tucked the card into my suit's pockets after giving it a pair an appreciative nod. Behind me, I could see both Thasia and Thalmann's expression shift to one of utter disbelief, perhaps at how effortlessly I acquired the card. Whilst Thasia's face was harder to read, given the beak, Thalmann's was easy enough to discern from how he had to do the double-take at the whole scene. I'm afraid I don't have an acceptance speech prepared, but I'm honored that you consider me for such an honor. Truly, and thank you. I paused for a moment, my gaze trained on the owl as I decided to ask just one more question. I must ask, why aren't you asking me for the rest of the information that's been left out from the card? Most it is within the library's interest to collect as much in the way of knowledge as possible. The manner in which this knowledge is collected is also important to us. You are a patron, Cadet Emma Booker. It would be unbecoming of the library to hawk you for every last scrap of information. We know that one day you shall reveal all there is to know, whether that day is measured in weeks, months, years, decades, or centuries does not matter to us. For the library is eternal, and we are here whenever you may require our services once again. There was a level of finality and confidence there that was difficult to really shake off. It truly felt like the owl wasn't just speaking with an inflated sense of ego, but instead out of factual observation. I assume this will be all for this visit, Cadet Emma Booker? Yes, then Buddy shall lead you to the entrance hall. From there you may exit back into your world. The owl took flight, flying closer to me than ever before. Until we meet again, Cadet Emma Booker. The voice echoed throughout the library as it threw out of sight. The journey back to the entrance took even less time this time around, as only a scant few minutes later we found ourselves once again in the forever shape-shifting room. The hallways, made up of bookshelves and untold quantities of unknown paraphernalia, ebbed and flowed like a particularly nausea-inducing screensaver. As we were escorted out, we spotted a few other figures roaming other halls, led by their own foxes, with one figure in particular being stalled near the front entrance. A familiar blue-scaled Venerian that was fuming in heated vitriol against yet another library fox. Do you realize who you are talking to right now, Fox? I'm telling you to get your librarian here. Get right this instant. The little thing yelled loudly, far louder than I'd ever heard him yell before, as the fox had only one thing to say in response. I'm afraid that would not be possible. The librarian is currently preoccupied with matters far more important than your own mortal. The little thing stood firm, assertive in its place, as Eleanor continued to seethe and fume. I turned to Buddy just before we left the threshold, making a point to kneel down for a moment, in order to hold the little thing's face in between both my hands. See you next time, Buddy, I spoke, making sure that it was loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Yeah, of course your personal library assistant shall be there, and ready and willing to help whenever you return next, Emma. The fox returned with an excitable yap, just as I turned to face Eleanor for a wink only I was privy to. With a few more steps, we finally left the threshold and were thrust back into the real world. The roaring of the waterfall hit us first, as both Thassia and Thelman turned to me in the same time. What now? Thelman asked with a heavy breath. Now we head to the courtyards. I turned to my onboard HUD just to confirm that we were still on schedule for the task ahead. We have an appointment with a certain apprentice to keep. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.